Hi and good evening. I'm Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton. Thank you all so much for tuning in to our Childhood Cancer Awareness Month Roundtable. My apologies for the late start. I was on the floor of the House voting. We made it, and hopefully nobody's going to have any technical difficulties, and this will all go very well, hopefully. I'm pleased to be joined by some remarkable parent advocates who know the hardships of childhood cancer firsthand. Today we have with us Ellen Miller, a constituent who I've known for many years and who I've been proud to partner with to introduce the bipartisan Gabriella Miller Kids First Research Act 2.0 in honor of her daughter Gabriella. Libby McLean, whose daughter Kellen was my guest of honor at this year's Joint Address to Congress, Roya Giordano, Sandy Rupp, Kathy Liu, and Lisa Ward. I'll let each of them tell their own stories in a moment, but first I want to share why hosting an event like this is so important for me and our collective efforts to deliver greater resources towards treatments and cures for childhood cancer. Childhood cancer impacts every community in every part of the country. Parents from Virginia to California have had to go through the torment of listening to a doctor deliver a cancer diagnosis for their child and then spend years and small fortunes on trying every possible drug and experimental treatment to get their kid healthy. Cancer is the leading cause of disease-related death in children aged 14 and younger. It's estimated that just this year, more than 10,000 American children under the age of 15 will be diagnosed with cancer. That's 10,000 families forced to go through unimaginable challenges that these six parents have gone through. Yet we still have such a long way to go to understand how and why these diseases affect kids the way that they do. Only about 4% of the government's funding for cancer research goes towards childhood cancer, which means there's still a whole lot we don't understand about how and why these diseases affect kids the ways that they do. That needs to change. We need greater funding for research into childhood cancer so that scientists and doctors can come up with treatments and eventually cures that are meant for kids, not adults. It's why I introduced the bipartisan Gabriella Miller Kids First Research Act 2.0, which would build on the incredible work of the Kids First program with a much needed boost in funding by redirecting penalties collected from pharmaceutical, cosmetic, supplement, and medical device companies that break the law. Essential to this fight is hearing the stories of those whose lives could be changed by it. I'm proud to be joined by these parents and courageous advocates today, and now I'll invite each of them to share a bit about how childhood cancer has affected them and their families and why they're in this fight. I want to begin by going around and inviting each of you to share a bit of your story and why you're in this fight. Ellen, let's start with you. I know that you are always a great one to lead it off because you have been such a fantastic advocate. And just so everybody knows, Ellen is in charge of helping me get co-sponsors for this legislation, and nobody ever says no to her. So she's fantastic. So please, Ellen, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Wexton. We don't have the words to thank you for your leadership with helping us move childhood cancer to center stage and get the attention and the funding that it deserves. So hats off to you and all that you've done to help us. I think that my story is very much like many other people's story. You know, one morning I had a perfectly healthy daughter, and then the next I didn't. Gabriella was 9. And one morning she was out with some friends, little girls' day out, and I noticed she had slight palsy in her face. And I talked with a friend of mine who was a pediatrician, and she's like, don't play around with that. It could be Lyme disease. It could be mono, go get her checked out. And we did, all the things that needed to be done. We checked off all the boxes, and it got worse. And we had actually made an appointment to go see a neurologist. And I convinced my pediatrician to let us get an MRI before going to the neurologist. And we, walked out of the MRI room, and the technician had called and a radiologist down to the room. The radiologist met me at the door and said, we found something, go directly to your pediatrician. I mean, that's how it happens for us parents in this childhood cancer world, is we get a diagnosis that just slaps us in between the eyes. And we're jumped, thrown into a world that we should never know about. And I think that everybody else will say as well that we had no idea how prevalent it is. It's like this big secret that everybody's keeping, but all of us here and countless others are trying to rip the lid off of that, because we want the world to know that kids get cancer, and that their drugs are 40, 50, 60 years old, that were made for adults. And we need to do something that's specific for our children, so that people don't get a diagnosis like Gabriella got, terminal undiagnosis. We want so much to get to the point that one day a cancer diagnosis will not be a death sentence, but just a terminal, or excuse me, or a terminal diagnosis, but actually something that is curable. And we've got that ability to do that. We just need the funding for that.
And can you just very briefly explain how you came up with the name of Smashing Walnuts for your foundation?
Oh, sure. So Gabriella's tumor was the size of a walnut. And I was driving with her one day from one doctor's appointment to another, and she was asking me how big it was. So I said, oh, it's about the size of a walnut. And I said, you and Daddy should go out after your appointments and go buy some walnuts and just go smash them, because then you'll be smashing your tumor. And it just kind of took off from there. We had people from across the country, around the world, taking pictures or videos of smashing walnuts. And then when we started our foundation, there was just no other name but Smashing Walnuts.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, and very inspiring. And I know that it can be very satisfying to take that frying pan and smash the walnuts. Yeah. For sure.
So I will share one thing, and we all have these ties to one another, but we started our foundation on the day that Sandy's son Gavin passed away. Literally, we signed the contract. It came up, we found out that he had just passed. And right then and there, Gabriella said the first grant that we make is going to be in Gavin's honor. And that was 10 months afterwards.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ellen. Roya, tell us a little bit about Team Matthias and about your son Matthias, what your family's gone through.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me. And thank you for thinking of Matthias. The day before Matthias was diagnosed, I was just a soccer mom. Just like Ellen said, he was healthy. He had just graduated 5th grade, athletic, smart kid. He was complaining about pain in his leg, which we thought was growing pain or perhaps a soccer injury. I took him to the pediatrician, very similar story as Ellen. The pediatrician mentioned that we don't want to expose kids to x-ray because it can cause cancer and other issues. Let's just go see an orthopedic doctor. I said, I'm not leaving until I have an x-ray order in my hand. Long story short, we got the x-ray order that day. The next day she called me and told me to go and get an MRI. We did that on Tuesday, the next day. And on Wednesday, I got a call to come into the pediatrician office to talk to her and cancel the orthopedic doctor's appointment and go to Children's. Matthias had a 21 centimeter tumor, like 9 inches in his leg, and he had over 86 spots in his lungs because the cancer had already spread. He was also terminal upon diagnosis, and they gave him 4 to 6 months to live. We never shared this information with him at the time or ever. Because we didn't want him to give up hope. The treatments that he was on or we were offered were over 25, 30 years old. He fought gracefully and always with a smile on. And he had his leg amputated. He had 3 thoracotomies. They were long 14-hour surgeries at Sloan Kettering in New York. We went out of our way to go to North Carolina for some clinical trials just to prolong his life. He had numerous rounds of radiation. He never gave up. What gave up was the outdated treatment. What gave up was his organs that failed him at the end, and he passed away on December 7, 2014. He fought for 29 months. So we miss him every day, and we try to keep his legacy alive through our foundation, which is called Team Matthias. It's a 100% volunteer-based foundation that helps support newly diagnosed pediatric families throughout the country.
Yep. And you guys were instrumental in getting those Virginia license plates with the childhood cancer awareness. There you go.
I'm glad you mentioned it. Yes,
Yep.
we did.
Yep.
It's actually a bill that passed in Matthias's name, and it's a awareness piece. It's strictly for awareness. There is no revenue that comes to Team Matthias or any other foundation. We're very proud of it. So the gold ribbon, as you see here, is on there, and we have had other families and other parents follow our footsteps in other states, such as New York. In New York, another osteosarcoma family designed the exact same gold ribbon on their plates. So you can get it throughout the country in certain states. And hopefully one day with the awareness and funding and research, we can actually have hope for other families that are getting diagnosed every day.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Roya. And what you guys have mentioned about the cures being so horrible and so hard on the kids is something that I hear over and over again. I know that a lot of these treatments were created decades ago and have not kept up with the times. And also one of the ways that cancer is treatments are targeted in adults is to go after the fast growing cells. And kids are not just small adults, because every single cell that they have is a fast growing cell. So sometimes using those medications and treatments on them really is extra difficult and hard on them, and really has a terrible impact. So that's one of the things I'm hoping that we'll be able to achieve through the funding, is to get more of the real targeted information using DNA sequencing and things like that to be able to really help.
My hope is also to keep saying that it's not rare, because the day before your child is diagnosed with cancer, you think it's rare. But that day that you get diagnosed or your child gets diagnosed, then you're one of us. So it's not rare, and we need to change something. When Matthias was diagnosed, every 3 minutes a child was diagnosed with cancer. Now it has changed since then. It's now every 2 minutes. So we need to work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We do. And I know that in my home county of Loudoun, there are so many cancer parents who really have had to deal with this and are wonderful advocates. I know some of you are from Loudoun as well. Sandy, tell us a little bit about I Promise 15 and Gavin, if you're okay with doing that with us.
Yes, thank you. But again, thank you for inviting me, and really appreciate you championing this bill. It's very important to all of us. My son Gavin was diagnosed when he was 11 years old with a glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor, GBM for short. And he was a kid who loved school, loved his friends, loved baseball, loved football. He just loved being with people, and he cried for a week with headaches, and we visited his pediatrician 3 times. And on a Saturday afternoon, he said, "Can we go to the hospital? It hurts so bad." So we decided not to wait for the blood test to come back that had been taken. We went to the emergency room, and not long after we were there and they ran a CT scan, they called me out of the room and showed me the screen. And he had a baseball-sized tumor in his head. And they immediately called an ambulance to transfer him to a larger hospital. 2 days later, he had brain surgery. And that was one of 3 surgeries he underwent. He underwent probably somewhere between 55 and 60 radiation treatments. He underwent numerous MRIs. I mean, these are all things that are very common for all of us. Our kids just constantly poked and scanned and whatnot. But he fought for 30 months, and his tumor spread and reoccurred 2 different times. And the last time it occurred in the core of his brain, and there were no treatments left. We were able to participate in 1 clinical trial in Houston But one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this bill, Gavin had the same tumor that Ted Kennedy had, Bo Biden had, Tug McGraw, who's Tim McGraw's father. These are all older men. There's a lot of people affected by it, but he was receiving the same treatment as people who were much older than him, and treatments that have been around for years and years. And when chemo treatment was not an option anymore, we only had 2 clinical trials available for him. And you have to pass certain hurdles to get into those trials. And one he did not pass, the other he did, but it was so advanced at that point that he was, did not have any success with that. He actually died probably a month and 2 months after his injection for that trial. But again, these are the reasons that I'm so passionate about this, because I don't feel like he had a chance once the tumor came back. And his type of tumor almost never is cured with a surgery. It's just too invasive. But we lost Gavin on July 30th, 2013, when he was 13 years old. And at that time, we, like many of the other parents, felt compelled to do something. And one of the biggest helps for us throughout our journey, for our entire family, were all the different medical staff that assisted us. And that's everything from the doctors to the social workers to the nurses to, hospital staff, you name it. They were all so helpful to us, not only in treating Gavin, but just supporting us all emotionally and mentally, on top of the physical aspect of treating Gavin. And so we decided to start a scholarship fund in Gavin's memory. And that scholarship fund we award to a Loudoun County senior every year who is looking to study something in the medical field, preferably with a childhood cancer concentration. So whether they want to be a child life specialist, a doctor, a nurse, social worker that works with childhood cancer patients, we're open to all that, but that is how we choose to honor him each year. And one of the reasons we chose to go the route of the scholarship is we spent so much time engulfed in his treatment that we felt like our other 2 kids were shortchanged. And that is heartbreaking, to think you miss a couple of years or however long of your kids growing up because you're so ingrained in this cancer world. So we felt like with the scholarship, we can still give back, but it didn't take us away from the day-to-day with our kids. And for us, that was a win.
Yeah, that's another thing that I hear from so many parents who have a child with cancer is that they feel such guilt because they can't be there for everything. I mean, they can't be at the soccer games, for moms who are soccer moms to be at the soccer games and to be at all the events and everything, and to be the class parent bringing in the cupcakes and everything anymore, because you just don't have any time because you're always shuttling your child with cancer around to appointments and treatments and things like that. So I certainly understand how you're feeling, and I know how are your other kids doing? Are they?
They're wonderful. My oldest son, or Gavin was the oldest of 3. My other son, Ian, is a sophomore at Ohio State, and my daughter is a sophomore at Briarwoods.
Wonderful. Good.
Great.
Yeah. Kids are resilient.
Yes.
Given the chance. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Sandy. Kathy, tell us about Joey's Wings and your son, Jace. I'm sorry, your son, Joey.
Joey. Hello. Hi. My name is Kathy. I am from San Diego, California, and I teach at a public school. Besides teaching, I'm also running a nonprofit organization called Joey's Wings Foundation to benefit children with cancer. So this is a picture of Joey. Yeah, this is my 10-year-old son, Joey, who passed away from a kidney cancer in 2014. Joey was a funny and kind boy. He was an intellectually gifted student, award winner of Mass League contest, and he played the violin in the County Youth Orchestra. In 2013, Joey was diagnosed with a kidney cancer, stage 4 translocation renal cell carcinoma. When he was diagnosed, um, he had no symptom. He was diagnosed. The tumors were found in a physical. When he was diagnosed, the disease had already spread out to his body. We were desperate as we were told there was no standard treatment for his cancer because of his rarity. And sadly, even today, after 8 years, there was still no standard treatment for his cancer. So we travel all over the country looking for treatment. Joey underwent 2 major surgeries and 4 different kinds of oral chemotherapies, but his tumor grew even more and spread. In 2014, I started a petition, compassionate use of a new immunotherapy drug that target that type of tumors that Joey had. This immunotherapy was already in adult trials and saving the lives of adult cancer patients. However, the pediatric trial was delayed. It actually finally started a year after he passed away. In October 2014, he finally tried a different immunotherapy drug, which was just approved by FDA in September. After 2 injections, all his tumors stopped growing. We had so much hope, but his body was exhausted, and this immunotherapy came too late for him. He passed away after um, he passed away the day before Thanksgiving that year. Um, and the next day on the Thanksgiving, we donated his corneas to an eye bank, which were transplanted into 2 adults separately. Even today, we are still wondering what would happen if he could try that immunotherapy earlier. Um, so after Joey's passing, I still have so many questions unanswered. Why is it that when I wanted to enroll Joey, there's no option out there? Why I have to go collect the signature from more than 10,000 people, and I went to my congressman, attorney general, and all the way almost to the top of the government to get someone from the drug company, from the FDA to call me. It shouldn't be this way. And on average, clinical trials for children begin 6.5 years after adult trials. This is what happened to us. The pediatric trial for Joe's cancer started 5 years after the adult trial started. So I have so many questions I answer. And 1 week after Joey's passing, I started Joey's Wings to continue his fight. We are devoted to promote support, advocacy, and education for parents, and fund research into kidney cancers that affect children and young adults. So
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for sharing your story and Joey's story. Think about how many kids could have been helped during those 5 years if they had started the juvenile trials at the same time, the pediatric trials at the same time. It's just very disappointing. Yeah, I feel like drug companies do not see the benefit for whatever reason in doing things for kids. I guess that maybe there's just not the upside of the profit for them or something, but it's very, very sad. So thank you for sharing. Libby McLean, your daughter Kellen was my State of the Union guest this year. She is absolutely amazing. She's a fighter. She's tough.
Yeah.
She says what she thinks, and she thinks a lot. So tell us a little bit about Kellen and how she's doing, because she's there fighting and advocating. So
she is. So like many of these parents, we lived a normal life and a very active, busy life until the day that we no longer did. In 2016, Kellen was, high school student, sophomore in high school, and she had spent years just working hard and being dedicated to her academics and her sports. And finally, she was really starting to see the fruits of her labor. We had spent that summer touring different colleges. She was trying to narrow down her options. She did want to play in college, play sports, and she definitely was on some lists for coaches interested in her. And then in the fall, she started to experience some, just unexplained back pain, low back pain, and fatigue. And we really just, we thought you're just training too hard, because she was just so dedicated and spent so many hours training. So we chalked it up to that for a while. And then that progressed to some debilitating headaches that we just couldn't find a cause for. She'd been to her doctor a few times. And then the final straw for me was the day that she didn't want to train. And that had never happened. Kellen trained everything. Um, Nothing stopped her ever. And so when she didn't want to go train, I knew there was something more, and I needed to probe a little bit more. So we went back to the pediatrician, and I'm so grateful to her for not, hesitating to do some blood work, because without that blood work, I am just scared at what the result would have been. So a few hours after the blood work, we get a phone call. The results were in, and we were told to go to Children's National immediately. And then we couldn't even wait till the morning. This was the middle of the night. I got the call, and I asked, they didn't tell me yet what the issue was. And I said, wait, we just got everybody in bed, and, can we go in the morning? We'll go first thing. And they, no, absolutely not. It's emergent. You need to take her immediately. And so, of course, that is what we did. And we found out later, in the few hours later, once we got there, that her bone marrow was 90% cancer upon diagnosis. And they were shocked that she hadn't already had a stroke. It was truly that dire. And she was immediately admitted to the PICU, the pediatric ICU unit, and they began treatment right away. Since that initial diagnosis, Kellen has fought cancer 3 times. She just completed her second bone marrow transplant. And, she has endured unimaginable pain and suffering that haunts me. It truly haunts me. The things that I've seen my child go through, it's haunting. And honestly, this is not an exaggeration. She has truly cheated death multiple times. I'm still amazed that her strength and her tenacity.
Yeah.
And
Sounds like she brought some of that spirit that she brought on the soccer field with her into this fight against cancer.
She absolutely did. And through this process, one of the things that just strikes me, and all of us, I'm sure, is that there's no shortage of doctors and researchers and nurses and support staff that want to do more research and want to find ways that we can, one, cure our children, but safer and more effective, and hopefully one day lead us to cures, like real cures or prevention of these childhood cancers. What we lack is the funding. And that's the worst thing for me, is to know that there are people there that want to work on these things, and they just don't have the funding. In fact, when Kellen relapsed the first time, and she was going through her first bone marrow transplant, her doctor at the time was had a grant and some funding for a research project for a trial that she wanted to use with Kellen in conjunction with the bone marrow transplant. And the hope was that it would increase her probability or her chances of the bone marrow transplant being successful long term. And by the time she got to the point where she would have been able to utilize that research and go through the trial, the funding had dried up, and it wasn't offered to her. So she gets through this transplant, and we thought all along that we were going to be able to utilize the trial to help ensure that she wouldn't have another relapse, and that this would be her cure. And there was no funding left, and so therefore she did not get that. Her first transplant kept her in remission for 19 months, and then she relapsed again. And at that point, we weren't even sure if she would make it to transplant again. And we weren't sure if she'd be offered an option. At that point, we were actually told there are no tried and true methods at this point. It's guesswork. So we sat down in a room and, doctors posed a question to my teenage daughter. Are you sure you want to do this? You know what you're in for. Are you sure this is what you want to do again? And as a parent, I cannot tell you how scary that moment was, but also just gut wrenching that doctors are having this conversation with my teenage child, and not knowing if, she was going to say, yeah, I want to do this, or maybe say, you know what, no. But they had to pose that question to her because her chances were just that low, that they wanted to give her full disclosure and give her an opportunity to make the decision for herself. But Kellen,
Yeah,
she is just,
she's like, challenge accepted.
It was challenge accepted. You tell me what I need to do and I'm ready to do. And so she was again given two different options that were question marks both. We did manage to get to transplant. And then surprisingly, at the end of transplant, we were able to take advantage of that same study that we were hoping to get the first time. And she received some resolved cells. And so far, she's doing well. We're about 10 months out from transplant. And, we're very, very lucky that trial had been funded again. And so we were able to take advantage of that because we had transplant, we had the resolved cells, and then there was something else that was being done that is really still in very early stages. And she would have been only the third patient to receive it. And it wasn't very promising. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I have her. Another thing that just really strikes me through this entire process is the fact that so many people think it is rare. Childhood cancer is not rare. There's so many children. And, right now I look at my middle child's high school, and there are 1,600 students that attend that high school. And, if you do the stats, there are more than 5 children in that building alone who have either had childhood cancer or maybe aren't even in that building because they passed, unfortunately. The research didn't make it in time for them, or the toxicity of the treatment was so harsh on their body, they just couldn't go on. So that's really it's unacceptable. I can't imagine why we're still fighting that. And the other thing that really just gets to me is that so many of our children and their families are raising money to fund their own cures. And the other aspect of that is, as they're raising this money in the hope of funding their own cure, they often know that that cure is not going to come in time for them. But they're fueled by the idea and the hope that maybe, just maybe, a child who comes after them will not suffer like them and will live and have a full life. And so I think that as as a country and as a society, that burden shouldn't be on children. We have a way to fund the research. We have a way to help save lives, save futures, and I thank you for supporting this and bringing more awareness. And my hope is that this continues to grow, and more we're going to see our children living full, healthy lives.
Thank you so much, Libby, and that's so well put. I mean, I know that everybody on this call everybody in this roundtable was nodding along with you, because I know that all these parents feel that way, that they're engaging in this advocacy and this fundraising, everything, not for themselves, but so that no other family has to go through what they did. And I think that that's the thing that's so wonderful about what you guys are doing. Just a couple things based on what you mentioned. I remember one of the things that Kellen told me that really struck me is that when one of the treatments she was getting was derived from mustard gas.
Yeah.
Which and that the everybody's nodding. I guess you were aware of this. And the people, the medical professionals who would administer it had to wear like these, not just PPE, but these really literally hazmat suits when they were giving it to her. And they're administering this, and it's going in her body. And it's just so horrible that this is what it's come to for these kids to get these treatments. I mean, I know we can do better. We've made such advances, and with genetic sequencing and DNA sequencing and everything, we can target this much better. It's just a matter of figuring out exactly how. And I'm glad that you brought up the sustained funding, because that's why I introduced the Kids First 2.0, because Kids First created this great receptacle for the cancer treatment research money. And thankfully every year Congress has funded it, but it would be good if we didn't have to go and go with our palms extended every year, hoping to get the funding. And if something went wrong, and as you know, there's a lot of gridlock on the Hill these days. We don't want you guys to be in the kids who are subject to this to be collateral damage in our petty squabbles on the Hill. So absolutely. Well, thank you, Libby. That was a wonderful story. And tell Kellett I say hey. Lisa, last but not least, tell us a little bit about Jace and how you came to be involved in your advocacy.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Representative Wexton. This is Jace, our son, and he was 20 years old 2 years ago when he was diagnosed with DIPG. And Jace was intending to go to law school and probably would have ended up on one of those offices on the Hill. He loved politics and he loved business. And so he was a natural at advocating once he learned a little bit about what faced him. But on a Friday in a neurologist's office in Kansas City, he was told, you don't have a tear from a recent car accident in your brain. You have diffused intrinsic pontine glioma, and that is an aggressive, it's a terminal, and it's an inoperable cancer. And Jace just looked this doctor square in the eyes and said, I guess if you're the best in Kansas City, I'm going to need you to tell me how long I have to live. And the doctor looked at me and I nodded. And Jace said, I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid not to have time to make an impact before I do. And the doctor said, you have 6 to 9 months to live. And Jace quickly calculated that was one day before his 21st birthday. And he often joked after that, but he's not one to miss a party. So his battle went on for 25 months. And during his battle, he coined the phrase, I can't die, I'm busy. And that's exactly how Jace lived every day. He had time for his friends and a wide group of friends, but he also had time to make an impact to those he met along the cancer journey. He could ask questions that those that in the typical age of DIPG, those 4 to 12-year-olds didn't know to ask yet. He had that voice, and he could explain to doctors what treatments felt like and what they did. And he took every opportunity to do that. And he spoke at Congress and NIH. So we learned some lessons from Jace along the way. At the NIH, 3 months into his treatment, he talked about ownership of his own genomic data. And that's something that was very important to him. And it's something that Gabriella Miller Kids First 1.0 has made possible through the Children's Brain Tumor Network. Families like ours can know more about our child's genomic data. We can know a little bit more about what the mutations of the tumors are. But it's not widely available to everyone yet. And we need to make access available. While he was speaking about that, a researcher said, I've worked on DIPG cells for about 12 years, and I've never met anyone with it. I've never looked DIPG in the eye. And Jay said, well, I'll tell you what I tell the staffers I meet with on the Hill. I say, I tell them didn't know what DIPG was either. I didn't even know I had a PONS until I was diagnosed. But what I know now is it threatens to take my walk, my hearing, my sight, my swallow, my voice, and my mobility, and eventually it'll take my last breath. And I'm in a race against time because I have the most deadly childhood cancer that kills more kids than any other disease in our country. And there is absolutely no cure. And there has not been one new standardized treatment since 1964. And that tended to get the attention of staffers who were not much older than him and could put themselves where they were maybe a couple years before studying for the LSAT and getting ready to assume a post on the Hill, because he never wanted his voice to end. So along the way, he also made sure that those that came after him, he took care of. He had the opportunity to enter into the one drug that is making some impact in 18 to 24% of DIPG patients, the one drug. And he was too old to get on a clinical trial for it by 4 months. And then he hadn't progressed enough to get on the adult trial. So he was caught in the middle of rules that don't work with respect to clinical trials. And so we have something called expanded access protocols that sometimes fit, but those have to be funded. And drug companies don't like to fund those because they're not a direct channel to FDA approval. They're considered compassionate use, and maybe we can't afford to be compassionate. And so a number of parents in the DIPG community heard Jace's story, and they spread the word. And by the grace of God and a number of advocates, he was allowed to take this drug. We'll open it up for you, Jace, but then we're going to close it again. So he got on the drug, and he immediately turned to me and said, now we've got to open it up for all the rest of the kids. And so we went about funding about $770,000 in the next year with other parents privately funding. So a total of 500 kids have been able to take that drug to date. And some have been on it 4 years, are still stable. And one was able to speak at our breakfast this past weekend. So there are a few outliers that create some success stories. But for Jace, after about 14 months, his tumor started to act a little funny. He had a few more symptoms. And so we were able to pull together some doctors because, his voice had been heard along the way. And we could ask 4 or 5 doctors, what would you do if it were your kid? Out of the trials that are there, based on the genomic information we have for Jace, what would you do? You see, we had the opportunity to have a biopsy. And at the time, only about 30% of patients even knew to do that. So that gave us the opportunity to look at what mutations there were and be able to start to rule out some of those phase 1 trials that hadn't maybe been as effective for those particular mutations. And then we had the opportunity to have 4 or 5 doctors on what we would maybe consider a multi-institution tumor board tell us, okay, here's what we think is the best. And it came down to, we can try a combination of drugs that we're sort of creating just for you on compassionate use, or you can go a whole new direction with a CAR T-cell trial. CAR T-cell had been used in leukemia patients successfully in lymphoma, but it was brand new, and he would be patient number 2 at Stanford University. And, we knew that in mice, the tumor had been fully eradicated in 75% of mice, but in 25% it had exploded their pons, immediate death. And while there were some opportunities taken from leukemia and lymphoma trials, blood trials, that maybe could be used to reduce inflammation, Pons is the size of a walnut. You can only have so much inflammation in there before you've got some real problems in the brainstem. So, Jace took the go big or go home approach. He wanted to live. He wanted to get rid of this tumor. And he knew if it didn't work, he was sparing a younger child that same opportunity. And he would say to me, it's going to be a lot easier for me to make this decision for myself than for the parent that has to make it for a 10-year-old. That parent could never live with the outcome. And you know that you couldn't talk me out of it. So he did the phase 1, and it was wonderful. The first dose, he went from barely being able to walk to being able to walk without much of a limp. He was able to go to Key West with some of his college friends and really have, a true, almost cancer-free experience for a week. And his face that had drooped, his double vision that had taken over, really corrected themselves. So in that trial, we learned that once those nerves are impacted, it's not necessarily they're destroyed. If we can pull back the tumor and the inflammation and loosen up that weave that constricts the area of the pons, which we think of as the bridge between the brain and the nerves, we can reverse those symptoms. But those symptoms came back about 3 months later. And so from that, they learned we've got to do these treatments in closer intervals. And the second dose, they put in through an Omaya catheter. It's kind of like a Nike pump under your scalp with a coffee stirrer that goes down to the ventricle. And they can put CAR T cells, which are engineered T cells that come from your plasma that are targeted like soldiers to go after a sugar molecule on the particular tumor. And they learned it would probably work because in a trial for neuroblastoma, it didn't work because those cells are more varied. And DIPG cells almost uniformly had this GD2 sugar. So we're learning, and we're learning because we know the molecular structures, we know the RNA sequencing, we know the genome sequencing, we know single cell. We had to have all that information to learn. And as we came forward, every dose that he took, we were able to reduce steroids and add another inflammation preventative. And every dose, he would get better. He was able to attend the Super Bowl. And all of these things are time added for a family. They are memories added for friends. And the 9 months extra that CAR T cell gave Jace, we are so grateful for. And we're so grateful that every single dose, he was able to impact the kids that came after him. Unfortunately, in July, his tumor had a hemorrhage unrelated to the trial, and it's very routine in older male DIPG patients. And Jace did pass away. But what they learned from his trial has now allowed 2 patients in that CAR T cell trial to have an over 95% removal of the tumor. And we don't know yet how long that'll stay. But every time we're collecting data and sharing it, we're able to move the needle, not just at Stanford, but across the globe when we share that data through the Children's Brain Tumor Network. When he was sick in January, very sick, when you go through these CAR T cell trials, as you guys might know, they're high fevers and tremors and rigors and just times when you feel like the worst flu ever. We would have 5, 6, 7 parents call in a week and say, we were just diagnosed. What should we do? It was almost overwhelming to me that in a year's time, I went from knowing 4 kids in 50 years who had died in childhood to 5 a weekend from DIPG, like this past weekend. It was just unfathomable to me that I knew now through Facebook and phone conversations and meeting at hospital lobbies over 240 parents who within just a couple years' time lost a child to the exact same tumor, and nothing had changed in the standard of care for 64 years. I couldn't believe it. But Jay said to me in January, "What happens if I get really sick?" And I said, "Of course, I'll be right here. I'll hold your hand. We're going to go through every step together." And he said, "But what happens to these parents that are trying to call us?" And I said, "We'll tell them to call someone else." And he was like, "Then we better decide who that is, because if I get sick, we can't leave them hanging. It's not fair for the 25-year-old with a 4-year-old not to get the same access as we got, because you knew what to say and I knew what to say. You didn't know that when you were 25 years old. And I couldn't say it when I was 4. And he was exactly right. So we pulled together about 15 of the best doctors: Ellen, Count Me In, Chad Tuff Foundation, Children's Brain Tumor Network. And we said we have to have a better way to navigate parents. And we have to tell them that biopsies are important. And we have to make tumor boards like the one we had as an ad hoc tumor board available to every patient. We have to make sure that we have a way to collect their data and put it into the Children's Brain Tumor Network, which also feeds in to the CCDI. So, we can't split hairs on that. It's all feeding the same place. And the way to help fund that fastest is through the Gabriella Miller Kids First 2.0. It has everything we need to make that role perfectly well. And what does that mean? We just asked the doctors, what would it mean if we had a well-oiled machine that collected that genomic data, that longitudinally said how kids were doing on this trial, and helped get kids into the best clinical trials, and then shared that data with researchers to make them better? And the doctors agreed it would change the outcome survival within 12 months. And it blew me away as we dug deeper to learn, in the biggest children's brain tumor database in the entire world, one that feeds from all different countries and all different angles, that has over 50,000 tumor samples, that there were only 79 fully sequenced tumors with DIPG. 79. That means the researchers had 79 children's tumors to learn as much as they could. But remember, in the last year, I had navigated personally, a mom who didn't even know that we had a PONS, 157 children. I had known 250 that died. What if we just made sure we got those tumors sequenced at diagnosis and could use that information for the child and collect it for the researchers? And then I found out there were more than 200 waiting to be sequenced because we didn't have the money to sequence them. And we're solving that piece now. And I think we'll find a way to start moving more through the sequence. But if we fund this and we do it right, we could have 600 tumors fully sequenced by this time next year, not 79. And we could save lives in real time. And that's why I'm involved, because I promised Chase we would do it. When he donated his tumor, he said, "I'm giving you my greatest asset. It's really the only thing I have to give. And I want you to share it. I want you to share it with researchers and doctors who will save the next kids. And if you don't, I'm going to haunt you. I'm going to haunt you." He's a character.
He meant it too, I'm sure.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to share his story.
Thank you so much for sharing Jace's story. I'm so sorry I never got to know him. He sounds like an exceptional young man, and he really made a huge impact. And thank you also. I could not be a better advocate for Kids First 2.0. I mean, this is exactly right. That's what we need, is the combination of the networks among parents and among doctors, and also just the big data. You know, the more information, the better we'll be able to target treatments, and to see, you know, what's worked in the past with various tumors, and what you know, and the more data, the better. So unfortunately, as much as I, you know, hate that every bit of additional data means another child with cancer, but hopefully we'll be able to use it for good.
That's right.
It's hard to believe that it's already been an hour, ladies. This has been absolutely wonderful. I want to thank all of you so much. I know that it has been extremely difficult for you. You know, I know that, you know, no parent wants to see their child suffer or be in pain at all, and you guys have had to deal with that, you know, to the nth degree. So I want to thank you so much for coming and for turning your grief and your hardship into action to help others. It was wonderful what you're doing. I will fight every day. I will think about Jace. I will think about, you know, I think about Kellen. I will think about all your kids, about Matthias and Gabriella and everybody in their brave fights, and Joey and everybody, and just hopefully, you know, bring 1/10 of that strength with me as I try to pass this legislation, because it is so important. But I hope that I can call upon all of you in the future to help us with this, because we need to get this thing done. Absolutely. You know, and just like you're turning your grief into action to help make things better for others. That's why I want to turn a negative, these penalties and fines from bad actors in the pharmaceutical and cosmetics industry, into a positive by turning it into something that will help ensure that no other family has to go through this in the future. So I really appreciate you guys coming and spending this evening with us on Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Thank you so much. Take care, and
Thank you.
talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.